My name is Charlotte Starks. I was 34 years old, working as a licensed occupational therapist in Columbus, when I found out I was 4 months behind on a $987,000 loan I never signed. It started with something embarrassingly small, a $34 overdraft fee that didn't add up. I drove to my branch on my lunch break to sort it out. I figured 10 minutes. I'd be back before my afternoon patients. The teller smiled, typed something, and her expression changed. She excused herself and came back with the branch manager. He introduced himself as Mr. Delgado and asked me to step into his office. He slid a document across the desk. "Miss Starks, are you currently operating a business called Starks Design Collective?"
No.
He turned the page toward me. A commercial loan agreement. $987,000. My full legal name. My social security number. My home address. And a signature at the bottom that looked almost but not quite like mine. I pulled up my credit report right there at his desk. The account was there. 2 additional credit lines I never opened. All of it traced back to 18 months ago, the exact window I spent recovering from a car accident at my parents' house, my mail going to their address, my life temporarily handed to other people. I thanked Mr. Delgado, took the photocopy, and walked to my car. I sat for 40 minutes with the engine off, the document in my lap. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even shocked, and that was the part that frightened me most. Because I already knew, before I made a single call, that when this came to light, my parents wouldn't ask how I was. They would ask me to be quiet. If you've ever been the one in your family who kept the peace at your own expense, this story is going to hit close to home. Subscribe so you don't miss where this goes, because it goes further than you think. I drove home from the bank on autopilot, hands steady on the wheel while everything else inside me was not. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Dishes drying on the rack, patient files stacked neatly on the corner of my desk, a half-finished grocery list magnet to the fridge. 1,200 square feet I'd furnished slowly and deliberately over 4 years. Every piece chosen because I'd saved for it. Nothing borrowed. Nothing gifted with conditions attached.
Meaning?
That had always been the quiet point of pride I carried but never announced. I paid my own way. I had since I was 22. I'd built a career that required real precision. Occupational therapy doesn't forgive carelessness. My patients were people relearning how to button a shirt after a stroke, how to hold a fork after a spinal injury. They needed someone whose attention didn't wander. I gave them that. I gave that to everything in my life. My credit score sat at 791. My rent was never late. My taxes were filed in February every year, while most people were still hunting for their W-2s. I was, by every measurable standard, the daughter my parents never had to worry about. Which meant I understood now that I was the daughter they never worried about protecting either. Judith was the one who needed things. She had needed them her entire life, with a consistency that the family had long ago stopped questioning and simply organized around. There was the photography business at 24 that our father quietly funded for 2 years before it dissolved. The boutique skincare line at 27 that our mother promoted to every woman in her church circle. The interior design firm, Judith's current venture, that had been almost profitable for 3 years running and somehow always needed just a little more time, a little more grace, a little more from whoever was standing close enough to ask. My parents gave it. Every time. Not because they were naive, they weren't, but because Judith asking for things had become the family's natural weather pattern. You didn't question rain. And I was the drought they never planned for, because I never demanded anything. I used to think that was a virtue. I'd worn my self-sufficiency like a quiet badge, the responsible one, the steady one, the one who made their lives easier simply by never complicating them. It hadn't occurred to me until I sat in that bank office that steady and invisible are not the same thing, but they can be made to function identically by people who find the distinction inconvenient. I opened my laptop and stared at the credit report still pulled up on the screen. $987,000. 18 months of payments already accruing in my name. A business I'd never touched, built on documents I'd never signed, funded through an identity I'd temporarily left in my parents' house like a spare key under a mat. I hadn't been trusted. I had been used. I went back to the bank the next morning with my passport, my social security card, and a folder containing every financial document I owned. I didn't sleep much. I hadn't tried to. Mr. Delgado had arranged for me to meet with the bank's fraud specialist, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had a quiet, unhurried manner that I suspected she'd developed specifically for moments like this one, moments when the person sitting across from her was holding themselves together with both hands. She thanked me for coming in. She set a manila folder on the desk between us and opened it without preamble. The loan application was 14 pages. She walked me through each one slowly, giving me time I didn't ask for but clearly needed. The business name was listed as Stark's Design Collective. The registered address was my apartment, the one I'd lived in alone for 4 years, whose lease had only my name on it. The applicant's email address was charlottesdesigns@gmail.com, an account I had never created and never seen before that moment. Then she turned to page 7 and slid it toward me. My signature, or something built to resemble it. Whoever had done it had studied the real version carefully enough to get the general shape, the way my C tilted slightly forward, the long loop on the K. But they'd missed the pressure. The way my hand actually moves across paper. I stared at it for a long time and felt something cold and specific settle in my chest. Patricia told me the loan had been originated 18 months ago, approved within 11 days of application, and that payments had been made sporadically for the first 6 months before stopping entirely. She said the contact phone number on the application was a number she'd already flagged as disconnected. She said the business had no registered LLC, no tax ID, no verifiable operating history. Approved anyway. Nearly $1 million, approved anyway. I asked her how that was possible. She chose her words carefully. She said that applications with strong personal credit histories moved through certain channels with less friction. She said my credit score at the time of the application had been 794. I had built that score over a decade. Carefully, deliberately, payment by payment, year by year. And someone had walked up to it like a door left unlocked and simply let themselves in. I asked Patricia when exactly the application had been submitted. She told me the date. I didn't need to cross-reference anything. I knew that month immediately, the way you know the dates that rearranged you. I had been 10 days out of my second surgery. I was sleeping in my childhood bedroom. My mail was going to my parents' address. My phone was managed half the time by my mother because the medication made it hard to focus. I had been completely, entirely helpless. And someone in that house had known exactly what to do with that. I spent that evening at my kitchen table with a legal pad, a pen, and 18 months of my own life laid out in front of me like evidence. I started with the accident. November, 2 years ago. A driver ran a red light on Marconi and hit the passenger side of my car at 40 miles an hour. I remembered the sound more than anything else. Not the impact itself, but the stillness that followed it, the strange quiet before everything became noise and movement, and strangers leaning over me asking if I could hear them. I could hear them. I just couldn't move. The first surgery was 3 weeks later. My shoulder, reconstructed. Recovery was 6 weeks of my right arm in a sling, sleeping upright, unable to drive. My apartment was on the 3rd floor with no elevator. My parents offered their house, and I accepted because I had no reasonable alternative. I told myself it was temporary. I was there by Thanksgiving and didn't leave until late January. The second surgery came in December. A complication they'd anticipated but hoped to avoid. I was under general anesthesia for 4 hours. The recovery from that one was slower, foggier. The medication made the edges of things soft and unreliable. I slept more than I was awake for the better part of 3 weeks. My mother brought meals to the bedroom. My father handled the few phone calls I couldn't avoid. My mail, forwarded to their address, sat in a basket on the hallway table that I trusted without thinking to trust. I wrote all of this down in the order it happened, and then I sat back and looked at what I had written. The loan application was submitted in December, the same month as my second surgery. The same month I was sedated, medicated, and entirely dependent on the two people who would have had unrestricted access to every document in that hallway basket. My social security card, my passport, my most recent tax return. All of it there, all of it available, all of it within arm's reach of anyone in that house who wanted it badly enough. I thought about Judith, about the way she'd visited during my recovery, bringing flowers I hadn't asked for, sitting at the edge of the bed, making conversation that felt, in retrospect, just slightly too careful, too pleasant. I'd attributed it to maturity at the time, assumed she was finally growing into something steadier. I'd been grateful. She hadn't been visiting me. She'd been confirming that I was incapacitated enough to proceed. That was the moment the last reasonable doubt I'd been quietly carrying dissolved completely. Because impulsive people see an opportunity and grab it. They act before they think, leave loose ends, make mistakes born of haste. But Judith had waited. She had assessed. She had timed this with a patience that required months of watching me and calculating exactly when I would be least able to stop her. This wasn't desperation. This was a plan. I waited 2 days before I called my mother. I needed those 2 days not to calm down, but to get precise. Anger is loud, and loud makes mistakes. I needed to be something quieter and sharper than angry. I downloaded a call recording application on my phone the night before. I read the one-party consent laws for my state twice, then a third time. In Ohio, only one person in a conversation needs to consent to the recording. I consented to my own call. I set the app to record automatically on answer, and I placed my phone on the kitchen table in front of me like I was sitting down to work. Because I was. I called my mother on a Tuesday morning, knowing she'd be home, knowing Charles would be at his weekly golf game. I kept my voice easy, warm, even. I told her I'd been thinking about the accident recovery, that I was doing some paperwork related to my medical records and needed to clarify a few dates. She said, of course, whatever I needed. I asked her when exactly my mail forwarding had started. She answered without hesitating. Too quickly, I noted, for a detail that's specific about something that happened 18 months ago. She gave me the precise date. I asked if she remembered which documents had come to the house during that period. She said she hadn't really paid attention, that she'd just left everything in the basket for me. Her voice was smooth, practiced. The cadence of someone reciting rather than remembering. I asked, gently, if Judith had ever mentioned anything about a business venture around that time. There was a pause. Brief. The kind of pause that isn't uncertainty but calculation. She said Judith had mentioned wanting to formalize her design work. That she'd asked Charles some questions about business loans. That they'd suggested she look into her options. I asked what options they'd suggested she look into. Another pause. Longer this time. She said she didn't remember the specifics. That it had been a casual conversation. That they'd only wanted to be supportive. I asked if Judith had ever asked about my financial information during that period. My mother's answer came just a half second too late and was just a half sentence too long. She said she couldn't imagine why Judith would do that, that they would never have allowed anything improper, that they had always tried to be fair to both of us. She had not answered the question. I thanked her. I told her I loved her. I ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the recording timer on my phone screen. 41 minutes and 17 seconds. They hadn't stumbled into this alongside Judith. They had shepherded it. They had managed the access, smoothed the process, and constructed their deniability in real time even now, answering questions about the past in the present tense of people who had been rehearsing. My parents hadn't been deceived by Judith. They had been her infrastructure. She now had the loan file, the timeline, and a recorded phone call with her own mother. What she did next, who she called, what she brought with her, and what she placed on that dinner table. that's where this story turns into something else entirely. The appointment was on a Thursday afternoon in a building that looked deliberately unremarkable, the kind of federal office designed to announce nothing about what happens inside it. I arrived 12 minutes early with an accordion folder containing everything I had assembled over the previous week. The loan documents Patricia had provided, my reconstructed timeline written out in chronological order, the printed credit report, and my phone with the recorded call already exported to an audio file on a thumb drive. I had not told anyone I was coming here. Not a friend, not a colleague. Certainly not my family. The investigator's name was Agent Sandra Reeves. She was probably 50, with reading glasses she took on and off in a rhythm that seemed tied to how seriously she was taking what she was hearing. She took them off when I sat down. She put them on when I opened the folder. She didn't interrupt me. She let me walk through the timeline from the accident to the bank visit to the phone call with my mother, and she read each document I slid toward her with the focused quiet of someone who does this work every day and has not become casual about it. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me over the top of her glasses. She told me this was one of the cleaner cases of family-facilitated identity theft she had seen in several years. I asked her what cleaner meant. She said it means you documented everything before you said a word to them. I sat with that for a moment, because I hadn't made a strategic decision to document first. I had gone quiet out of instinct, out of the same reflex I'd been exercising my entire life. The one that said, wait, observe, don't make noise until you understand what you're dealing with. The habit my family had always privately read as compliance, as Charlotte being easy, as Charlotte not being a problem. It had never once occurred to me that the thing they'd trained me to do to keep their lives comfortable was the exact thing that would now make it impossible for them to escape what they'd done. Agent Reeves told me the recorded call was significant. She told me the timeline correlation between my surgical recovery and the loan origination date was significant. She told me the forged signature and fabricated business email constituted federal wire fraud, and that my parents' facilitation of document access placed them within the scope of the investigation. She asked if I understood what I was initiating. I told her I did. She asked if I had any hesitation. I thought about my mother's voice on that call. The smoothness of it. The rehearsed patience of a woman who had decided, long before I called, exactly how much she was willing to admit and exactly how little she intended to sacrifice. I told Agent Reeves I had no hesitation. She took her glasses off and wrote something down. The investigation opened that afternoon. Agent Reeves had advised me to make contact. Not to confront, not to accuse, but to gather. A casual family gathering, she explained, had a way of producing exactly the kind of unguarded conversation that formal settings shut down. People relax around a dinner table. They say things they've calculated not to say in other rooms. I understood what she was asking me to do, and I told her I could do it. I sent the text on a Saturday morning. Simple and neutral, the kind of message that gave nothing away. I'd like to sit down together. I've had some time to think, and I want to talk. My mother responded in under a minute. She said that would be wonderful, that she'd been hoping I would reach out, that she would make dinner, and we could all just be together as a family. The eagerness of it landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. She had been waiting for this text. Not because she missed me, because my silence had been making her nervous, and my reaching out meant, to her, that I was coming back into the fold. Judith sent a voice message 20 minutes later. Her voice was warm and slightly breathless, the way it got when she was performing relief she wanted witnessed. She said she was so glad. She said she'd been worried about me. She said it would be so good to have everyone in the same room. She said, I've missed you, Charlie, in the soft tone she reserved for moments when she needed me to feel chosen. I listened to it once and set my phone face down on the counter. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt the particular clarity that comes when you finally understand the shape of something you've been living inside, without a map. Every warm word from Judith, every quick response from my mother, it was all the behavior of people who believed this dinner would be the place where Charlotte quietly folded. where the family would regroup around a shared story and I would be absorbed back into it, relieved to be included, grateful enough to let things go. They were expecting the version of me they had always known. I spent Sunday afternoon organizing my folder. The loan documents in order. The timeline printed clean. The thumb drive clipped to the inside cover. I set my phone to record automatically at the start of an active call, but kept it accessible. I went through everything twice, then a third time, not because I'd missed anything but because thoroughness was the only thing I could control. That evening I ironed my clothes for the dinner. A plain navy blouse, dark trousers, flat shoes. Nothing that asked for attention. Nothing that could be read as performance. I got into bed at 10 o'clock and turned off the light. I slept without interruption for the first time in 2 weeks. Deeply, quietly, completely. I was ready. My parents' house smelled the same as it always had. Roasted garlic, something herbed, the particular warmth of an oven that had been running for hours. I stood in the doorway for just a moment before my mother appeared from the kitchen with her arms already open, already performing the reunion she had decided this evening would be. She had made my favorite meal, braised short ribs with roasted vegetables, the dish she reserved for birthdays and reconciliations and moments she needed to signal effort. I recognized it for exactly what it was, not comfort, not love, but an investment, a softening agent. She had cooked my favorite meal the way someone props open a door they're hoping you'll walk through without looking at the frame. I hugged her. I told her everything smelled wonderful. I meant neither thing. Charles was already at the head of the table when I came in, his posture carrying the particular authority of a man who had decided in advance how this evening would resolve. He stood to embrace me, called me sweetheart, asked about my drive. His ease was almost impressive. Almost. Judith arrived 12 minutes late with a bottle of red wine and the bright, slightly over-calibrated energy of someone who had rehearsed their entrance. She hugged me longer than necessary, both hands pressed to my shoulders, and pulled back to look at my face the way people do when they're checking for signs of what you know. I kept my expression easy and gave her nothing to read. We sat. My mother served. Charles poured the wine Judith had brought. There was comfortable conversation about nothing, a neighbor's renovation, my father's golf handicap, a show my mother had been watching. I participated just enough to remain unremarkable. I ate a few bites of the short ribs and noted, somewhere in the back of my mind, that she had cooked them perfectly. I waited until everyone had settled, until the second pour of wine, until the particular loosening that happens when people believe the hard part of an evening isn't coming but has already been avoided. Then I reached into the bag beside my chair and placed 3 things in the center of the table. The loan file, Agent Reeves' card, my phone, screen up, the recording application open and running. The conversation stopped as though I had cut a wire. I looked at each of them in turn. My mother's hands went still around her glass. Charles set down his fork with a care that suggested his hands needed something to do. Judith looked at the folder and then at me, and something behind her eyes went very quiet. I kept my voice level. Unhurried. The voice I use with patients who need steadiness more than they need sympathy.
I'm not here to yell, I said.
I'm here to tell you what happens next. Nobody reached for their wine again. What followed was not a confession. It was a performance, and I watched it with the detached attention of someone who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the curtain to come down. My mother went first. The tears arrived quickly, which told me they had been staged in the anteroom of this moment for days, ready to be deployed the instant they were needed. She said she had been so worried about me. She said she had not slept. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and shook her head as though the situation were something that had happened to her rather than something she had helped construct. Charles went second. He straightened in his chair and became, in the space of a breath, the patriarch, measured, reasonable, the voice of perspective in an unreasonable situation. He talked about family. He used the word so many times, I began counting quietly. By the end of 20 minutes, he had said it 14 times. Family absorbs difficulty. Family finds a way. Family does not hand itself over to institutions that don't understand the complexity of family. Every sentence circled back to the word like a drain, pulling everything toward it, as though the word itself were an argument. Judith waited until both of them had finished before she spoke. Then she looked at me with an expression I recognized, the wounded indignation she had deployed my entire life whenever accountability came close enough to touch her. She said I was destroying everything. She said I was blowing up the family over money, over paperwork, over something that could be handled privately if I would just be reasonable. She said the word reasonable the way people say it when they mean compliant. She said she had always been there for me, which was so thoroughly untrue that I felt something almost like admiration for her ability to say it. I sat through all of it without interrupting, without shifting in my chair, without giving any of them the reaction that would have allowed them to redirect the conversation toward my emotions rather than their actions. Then my mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was gentle. Her eyes were wet. And she leaned forward and said it quietly, almost tenderly, as though she were offering me something precious. "We just need you to be quiet one more time, Charlotte. Just this once. For the family." I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about every previous time I had accepted that ask. Every dinner I had left early to avoid conflict. Every truth I had swallowed to keep her comfortable. Every version of myself I had made smaller so that the architecture of this family could remain intact around me. I removed my hand from hers. I told them Agent Reeves expected my call by 8 o'clock the following morning. I pushed my chair back, picked up my bag, and walked to the front door. My mother called my name once. I did not turn around. I left before dessert. If you're still here, you already know Charlotte deserved better than every single thing that family put her through. Subscribe and stay with me for the ending because she does get one. A real one. On her own terms. The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest about that because stories like mine are often told as though justice moves with the same urgency as the crime, and it doesn't. There were months of investigation, months of documentation requests, months of calls with Agent Reeves and the prosecutor's office and my own attorney, who I paid for with money I had saved for a vacation I kept postponing. There were hard months and tedious months and months where the whole thing felt so large and slow that I had to remind myself, sometimes daily, that slow is not the same as stopped. Judith pleaded guilty 14 months after I walked out of my parents' house without touching my dessert. Federal identity theft.
Wire fraud.
She was sentenced to 26 months and ordered to pay full restitution. I was not in the courtroom when the sentence was read. I had asked my attorney to call me when it was done, and I was at work when my phone buzzed, finishing notes on a patient who had relearned how to tie his shoes that morning after 4 months of trying. I read the message, finished my notes, and sat quietly in my office for a few minutes before my next appointment. Charles cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentencing. He received 3 years of probation and a restitution order. My mother was not charged. Her role, while clear to me, existed in a legal space the prosecutors described as difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt. I accepted that. The law is not a perfect instrument. I had learned to want what it could actually give me rather than grieve what it couldn't. The debt was formally severed from my name on a Tuesday in March. My attorney sent the confirmation as a PDF attachment with a single line of explanation and no fanfare, which felt appropriate. I printed it and put it in the accordion folder with everything else. My credit score crossed back over 796 months after that. I made an offer on the house 2 months later. It was a small craftsman on a quiet street in Clintonville, with original hardwood floors and a front porch that caught the late afternoon light in a way that stopped me the first time I saw it. The porch had 2 weathered boards that needed replacing, and a railing that had been painted one too many times. It was not perfect. It was structurally sound and honest about its age and entirely, irreversibly mine. I closed on a Friday. I got the keys at noon and drove there alone. That evening I made coffee in my own kitchen, carried it outside, and sat on the front porch in the cooling air and watched the street. A neighbor walked a dog. Two kids rode bikes in lazy circles under the streetlight. Somewhere down the block someone was grilling. Nobody called. Nobody needed anything. Nobody asked me to be smaller than I was. The quiet settled around me like something I had always deserved. I drank my coffee and let it